Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest Labour CND podcast. It's on what President Trump has in mind for Venezuela. He's had Venezuela firmly in his sights since Hugo Chavez's successor, Nicolas Maduro, won an election last year and returned as president of Venezuela in January this year. Now, the US military is parked on Venezuela's doorstep. And I'm joined today by Francisco Dominguez. We'll be exploring just what's going on. In March, Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on all goods coming into the US from any country that imports Venezuelan oil. Venezuela has been under sanctions since 2014 for what Congress documents euphemistically say is to hasten a return to democracy. At the end of August this year, in addition to tariffs and sanctions, Trump authorized the deployment of around 6,000 US troops with fighter aircraft and warships off the coast of Venezuela. It includes a nuclear-powered submarine armed with Tomahawk missiles, they're long-range, high-precision missiles that travel under the radar at about 550 miles an hour to deliver bombs to their target. And the US forces have already attacked several Venezuelan boats, fishing boats, killing dozens of civilians. It's the biggest US military build-up in Latin America for decades. According to Trump, it's part of his anti-narcotics campaign. But the military deployment is one that's oriented towards a land attack, not for counter-narcotic operations. B-52 bombers are designed to destroy land-based targets from a distance. F-35 stealth bombers are designed to fight and gather intelligence while remaining undetected by the radar. Trump denies his actions amount to launching war on Venezuela. He says, and I quote, "We're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country." Francisco is going to be telling me just what he thinks all this means for Venezuela and for Latin America. And I hope he'll have a few things to say about Britain's response to what's going on as well. Okay, first let me introduce Francisco Dominguez. He came to Britain in 1979. He was a political refugee from Pinochet's Chile. He was head of the Latin American Research Group at Middlesex University, and he writes for Tribune, Labour Outlook, Morning Star, and several Latin American publications. He is also the National Secretary of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. So who better could we have to give us the lowdown on Trump's plans for Venezuela? Welcome, Francisco, and thanks very much for making time to join the Labour CND podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. This is a very great opportunity, or good opportunity to actually tell people on what is involved. One of the biggest things that they deployed is the USS Gerald Ford, which is an aircraft carrier that has the capacity to take with it between 75 to 90 F-35s. So, and the information coming from the White House itself and the Pentagon is not 6,000, it's 16,000 soldiers. So this is a very, very dramatic thing. And the whole argument regarding Venezuela being a narco state or a deployment, war deployment in order to fight against narco trafficking because they're going to the United States, one wonders what would be small boats that blown out of the water about 15, I think. And the total number of people so far is about 62. The first question one has is, why can't they intercept them and arrest them? That's number one. Number two, if they really want to stop drugs coming into the United States, why don't they deploy even a bigger fleet within his own territorial waters, which would be much more effective? And number three, these boats, in order to make it to Florida, which is possibly where they're going, it will take them something like they have to stop about 16 to 20 times in order to refuel. So it doesn't make sense. And even worse, who of the narco traffickers are going to start sending stuff exactly at the moment when there is a massive war fleet deployed by the United States? I think is about regime change, because the United States is desperate to lay their hands on the largest reserves of oil in the planet, which is about 300 billion barrels of oil, which at the present levels of consumption would last for about 300 years.
Wow, that's a very dramatic beginning. Okay, well, let's start by exploring why Trump, who wants to be known as a president of peace, seems to be getting ready to launch a war. What would you say, Francisco, led up to the sanctions and the gunboats?
The sanctions began with President Obama. I mean, from 1999, when President Trump was elected, the United States had been organizing destabilization campaigns literally non-stop. There is not a single year, you could even say not a single month in these 25, 26 years, when the United States has not been involved using their domestic proxies to try to overthrow the government. They never wanted to defeat the government, they wanted to overthrow it, and they're still trying to do. I think there are two important reasons for it. Number one, they did not want a government in the region in 1999 that actually was challenging neoliberalism. The constitution that Chavez got promulgated in 1999, literally a few months after he was elected, was against neoliberalism. And one of the key clauses of the constitution was the oil industry remains in state hands, and the revenues, and that was the difference, is going to be used to actually fight against poverty for a better distribution of income. And ever since, this has been going on. So that is Obama actually began to apply this with Executive Decree 16032, which declared Venezuela an unusual and extraordinary threat to his foreign policy and a threat to the United States national security, which is really a formula that they use in order to justify legally, any attack. And this took place exactly in 2015. That means to say it took place 2 years after Chavez died. So their calculation must have been, and we know it was, well, without Chavez, it's going to be easy to overthrow it. So let's just start, squeezing the economy. The number of sanctions that they began to apply ever since up to now is at the moment 1,050 of them. The idea was to asphyxiate the economy completely. Literally, Venezuela has been completely blockaded from exporting and importing everything, even to the point of the United States being determined to even lead a Mexican company to bankruptcy that was exporting food to Venezuela. The idea was to ensure that there was desperation, that people suffer enormously. They're punished for having elected this government that the United States did not want. No oil, no gold, no export, no import from Venezuela out and into Venezuela in. And the idea was that they will be able to destroy, asphyxiate it, produce an internal turmoil, and then they will come in to sort it out. And what is extraordinary, they fail miserably because the economy has recovered thanks to the policies of President Nicolas Maduro. You're muted.
Sorry about that, folks. Let's turn, if we may, for a moment to what happened during the elections last year, and in fact before it. And that is that the United States declared the elections a fraud. Before we move on to more information about sanctions and so forth, can you spend a couple of minutes on that for us, please, Francisco?
Yeah, I think there been 33 elections since 1999 in Venezuela, more than in the previous 40, 50 years. And there's only one, as far as I remember, maybe two, but certainly one, which they recognized the results of. And that was in 2006. And the second one was in 2015 when the opposition won. Otherwise, opposition literally every single time has done two things. Number one, they go into huge media offensive, which has huge echoes internationally by the mainstream media, to say that, the election is rigged, the government is using resources that it shouldn't, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. But all these political parties from the right can field candidates. They have fielded candidates every single time. And when they lose the election, which they have, on most of the occasions, I think in 3 occasions is the one, in all the other occasions, the government has won. Every time that they lose, they scream fraud. But they never, not once, and there is, the record is there, not once they actually submitted a specific evidence to say, this is why we're saying that the elections were fraudulent. And in the last election, it was exactly the same, with the following difference. That at the time in 2024 in July, on the 28th of July, which was the election, the electoral system, the computerized electoral system was subjected to a massive attack, which was, millions and millions of cybernetic attacks literally every minute. And, the government could demonstrate it. They were able to destroy the first firewall out of 15. And that delayed the counting. But there was no fraud. And rather than waiting for the results, fully, before the full results were given, because the information was given with 80% of the vote that counted, the opposition, Maria Corina Machado, went on television literally 30 seconds after that, after the National Electoral Authority informed the results up to that point. She claimed that she had won with 80% of the vote. And they produced a fake website with totally false information, claimed that they won. And ever since, the media have been actively repeating the same thing. So far, there's been no evidence whatsoever that this is the case. So that is the situation with that one. And as soon as they lost, they launched the day after, they launched a huge wave of violence where, several people were killed. I know this because I happened to be there. I saw it. I witnessed it with my own eyes. They attack international things. They attack ambulances. They attack hospitals, creches. They try to set things on fire. And these kids that were being paid money, this is the evidence that's been presented, were given something called Captagon, which is an amphetamine, because they drive them crazy and they became extremely dangerous. Our hotel where I was attacked. And the poor soldiers that were outside, all 3 of them were brutalized, and their motorbikes were set on fire in front of my eyes. I saw it from the window of my room. So every time they've done this, so that is the story. And of course, the international media and the right-wing media internationally denies that this is the case and never mention the huge amounts of violence and the number of people who have died in so many waves of violence the opposition has organized.
Wow, that's really interesting. I've seen a lot of claims that the statements by the opposition are not backed up. But I've also seen, am I right, that Britain and the European Union are backing up what America's saying. Perhaps we can get on to Britain a bit later on, but for the moment, can I please return the sanctions. Okay, so I've got a couple of things that I want to suggest you might expand on, Francisco. First, it's pretty obvious that Trump's secondary sanctions are aimed at impeding Venezuelan oil exports. If successful, this would seriously destabilise the economy, I think. But as I understand it, China imports something like 85 to 90% of Venezuelan oil. So one of the things you might comment on, will China continue to import on this level, do you think? I recently saw a report, for instance, that Venezuelan oil exports have dropped very dramatically in the last month. Not all crude oil is the same. Different crudes are refined for different purposes. It depends on their viscosity and their sulfur content. Venezuelan crude is heavy and sour. In other words, it's thick, it's highly viscose, that is, and it has a high sulfur content. That makes it suitable, for example, for heavy industrial purposes, but not for petrol or diesel fuel. Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves in the world, but it also has to import light crude to blend with its own oil in order to be able to export its own oil. I wonder if we've got any view on how the sanctions could affect that. So that's my first point. My second point, in relation to US oil companies, in March this year, Trump also signed another executive order requiring Chevron, a US oil giant, to wind down its operations in Venezuela. This hasn't happened yet, as I understand it, and Trump is giving Chevron more time before he imposes any penalties. The US doesn't import very much Venezuelan oil at all, but Chevron refineries are geared up to process the particular type of crude that comes from Venezuela, and they're likely to be in technical difficulties, at least, if they're required to shift to another source. The Trump's tariffs, and this brings me to my final point about sanctions, Trump's tariffs will not only have an impact on Venezuelan economy, but oil experts are beginning to express concern that the impact Trump will have across the international oil market. So, do you think Trump actually understands what his tariffs and sanctions are about, what effect they're likely to have? Sort of collateral damage on the oil industry, as it were, which will be by no means good for the United States or anywhere else. What else? What can you add to the issue of oil and sanctions?
Yeah, let me start with the first part, which is sanctions. Between the being reports, with the statistical information, between 2017 and 2018, as a result of Trump sanctions, which he ratcheted them up massively, the total number of people that only in that year died unnecessarily because of people with chronic diseases and, pregnant women, babies that were born with problems, the elderly, and so on, was 40,000. Then if you take 2017, 18, 19, 20, which is when the Venezuelan economy began to recover, my sense, given the level of lethality of these sanctions, which were aimed at the population, not only the economy, possibly between 100 to 150,000 people actually died. Just so that your audience, have an idea of what we're talking about, because these are cold figures. The Chilean dictatorship, Pinochet, assassinated 5,000 people in 17 years. 150,000 is the equivalent of dropping bombs regularly on the whole country throughout it, because the number of people that suffered were everywhere in the country, from north to south, east to west, and in the center. So that's the first part. It was nasty, really nasty. People went hungry. You can imagine what it means. The whole idea was demoralize the population in order to actually weaken their support for the government. That was the first thing. The economy itself was completely blockaded from the world economy. And it was so bad. I haven't got time to go into all the details, but it was so bad that the IMF at one point, I think 3 years ago, indicated that the level of inflation of Venezuela was 1.5 million percent. That gives you an idea, it was nearly collapsed. And then on top of all of that, the Venezuelan economy was expelled from the world financial system. Venezuela could not engage with dollars. Venezuela could not actually engage in transactions. And what happened was this. Whenever the government actually pay a particular account or a particular bill in order to import something or pay for whatever it requires internationally, it paid to an international financial institution, a bank usually. The bank not only did not carry out the transaction, it did not return the money. And then the United States compounded this by confiscating, freezing their accounts, and confiscating the company Citgo, which belonged to Venezuela, which is located the east coast of the United States, which has 3 refineries and about between 6 to 10,000 petrol stations in the whole area, which belong to Venezuela. This was confiscated, plus money is retained by Euroclear, Novo Banco de Portugal, and few others. If you take everything out, including the gold being, illegally retained by the British government, altogether it amounts to something like $60 to $80 billion. So the whole idea was to actually kill it. And then on top of that, Obama particularly increased the amount of fracking massively in the United States with the intention to produce a glut of oil in the world market to make the economy of Venezuela collapse. So the United States increases daily production of oil from 4 million barrels of oil to 10 in almost no time at all. The consequence was that the barrel of oil in 2008 was $150 the barrel. In 2 years, if not less, it went down to less than 25. The economy of Venezuela suffered enormously. So the whole thing was to ensure that that was the case. The production of Venezuela, which was normally 3.5 million barrels of oil a day, went down to something like 200,000, almost total collapse. And this was deliberately made worse by the United States, but Trump in particular, denying and castigating, punishing companies that were selling Venezuela diluent. And as a consequence of the whole thing, really was very bad. Nevertheless, Venezuela was able, we recipients and we the imaginative, imagination, creativity. I don't have all details. I don't have the time to tell you all about it. The production has recovered from what it was, 200,000 to more than 1.2 million barrels of oil a day. And this is getting better because China sent a floating platform to extract oil, in the coast of Venezuela, which is going to help enormously. The Chevron story is that the United States, without the oil from Venezuela, because all the refineries that are in the east, were in the east coast, actually are only designed for that purpose. So you cannot refine any other oil except Venezuelan one. That's why Biden and Trump suspended temporarily the sanction and allowed Chevron to actually extract oil in order to ensure that the East Coast did not collapse, energetically speaking. So Venezuela was quite happy to do this. In the meantime, I don't have all the details. Venezuela was ensuring that we're circumventing this blockade as much as possible to ensure that it has partners and customers internationally to sell the oil. And I think China is the main one. In fact, my information is that the production of oil, the output of oil is not going down, it's going up. every single time. And it will continue to do so. Venezuela doesn't want not to sell oil to the United States. And the reason is this. If the Venezuela government were to stop completely the selling of oil when the United States want to buy, it will deem deliberately as an act of war. And therefore they will have a casus belli to go for it. So Venezuela continues to collaborate as much as possible, but in the meantime, everything it can do to sell to somebody else, it will do. And that's why Venezuela this year has recovered so well that it's going to grow at a rate of something like 9% in 2025, which is absolutely amazing.
Well, it certainly is. That was a really deep dive into the impact of oil on the Venezuelan economy. Thank you, Francisco. But let's turn, if we may, to a broader topic rather than a deeper dive. Can you tell us, returning to the Trump military buildup, can you tell us how other Latin American countries have so far responded to having the American fleet parked on the border of Venezuela?
It's extremely threatening, what the United States is doing, because just to contextualize, it seems to me, for your audience, if the United States were to be able to overthrow the government and take control of Venezuela, which I think is very unlikely because Venezuela will resist with everything they have, and they do have things with which to resist. The United States, in that position, will immediately, literally that second after, will attack Cuba with everything it has. And very likely, simultaneously, will attack Nicaragua. And it will threaten everybody else. Imagine these little islands in the Caribbean, which being uncomfortable, not supporting the war effort by the United States on this particular occasion. The United States has a conception which is an island which they take over becomes what they call an unsinkable unsinkable aircraft carrier, which, from the strategic point of view is quite important. So the United States really is threatening not only Venezuela, but the whole region. And the whole region has reacted, as you'd expect. There was a meeting of CELAC, the Commonwealth of Latin American and Caribbean states, which was called by Brazil, Venezuela, and others. And it has something like 35 states are part of it. Canada and the United States do not belong to it. They've been excluded. And more than 21 nations issued statements saying we don't like it. This was including Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and a few others. Countries such as Argentina, and normally Argentina is part of the same trap, but on this occasion, because of Milei, they will support whatever Trump will do. And the message coming from Latin America is extremely strong. We are a zone of peace. We don't want you to actually not only bring submarines, nuclear submarines, because it's a nuclear-free zone, which we declare ourselves. And on top of that, you are actually threatening everybody. We don't like it. And then Trump, instead of saying, no, don't worry, we are not attacking you, we're just attacking this rogue regime in Venezuela, they began to attack Petro in Colombia, threatening him with regime change, and they're threatening with military action against Mexico. And then there was conversation with Brazil and so on. So that's the first part. I mean, the reaction by Latin America, with the exception, particularly the Caribbean countries, most of them said we don't like it, except Trinidad and Tobago, which is extremely close to Venezuela. And there was an attempt recently where the United States sent a destroyer that docked in the Trinidadian port. And then several mercenaries from Trinidad, including CIA agents, this is informed by the government of Venezuela, were arrested because the intention was to actually organize an attack against that U.S. destroyer from Venezuelan soil in order to produce, a casus belli. Thankfully, the impression I have is the intelligence of Venezuela and their capacity to stop these sort of things is very good. So that gives you an idea of where they are going. And if I may comment on the strategy of Venezuela in terms of dealing with this, not only preparing itself, which is quite obvious, all the newspapers are in reporting on this, but the main thing, as I understand it, this is my own take, is a political strategy. The idea is to isolate the United States as much as possible to make it very difficult politically for them to carry this out. The Venezuela has a very skillful diplomacy, very skillful, very effective. They've been very good at getting the Security Council of the United Nations to actually have discussions on the aggression against them. They mobilized the non-aligned movement, the G77 plus China. They mobilized, several other countries and several other bodies internationally and so on. And interestingly, inside the United States, there is a growing body of opposition within the Congress and the Senate against this adventure by Trump. So Venezuela is is focusing on ensuring that this is at the same time that it prepares with everything it has to defend their land with their lives as much as necessary. So this seems to be paying off because it's taking this long and it's continued to take longer. Let's hope it doesn't happen, but we'll see.
Yeah, thanks. Why do you think there is a growing opposition? What's happening in a growing opposition in the United States to what's happening? What's that about?
Well, I think there are three reasons, if I can summarize. Number one, I think there are people who genuinely are against, the United States acting imperialistically and, organizing aggressions against any other country. That's number one. There is a second one, which are very concerned, saying what you're doing with these, what you call war against narco trafficking is killing innocent people, which is in a situation where there is no war. And therefore, what you're doing is perpetrating what is known legally as extrajudicial killings, which are crimes against humanity. So the United States had to deal with the mess later on when countries, Trinidadians are being killed, Colombians are being killed, Ecuadorians are being killed, Venezuelans are being killed, and so on, from the area. And then they go to the United Nations after all of these terrible things happens or goes away. And then they're going to say, well, we want to sort of bring these people to justice because they perpetrated crimes against humanity. There is a second dimension of that. And in that category, I include Hillary Clinton, who said publicly on national television in the United States, saying, what is it you're doing? These are crimes against humanity. She denounced it as such. Not that she's a friend of Venezuela or anything. And there is a third current, which includes sections of the military, which is this. If we go in and we don't succeed, and the Venezuelan government is quite ballsy, it's quite strong, and, it keeps preparing, it's not capitulating, there's total unity there. And what we're doing is making that unity even stronger by, organizing aggression. If we go in and we fail, we will be in a quagmire, and the Venezuelans are likely to bring their allies militarily into our region. And then once they're in, and they're thinking, of course, of the Russians and the Chinese, which may happen and may not happen. I have not any information about this. If that were to happen, then what do we do after that? This is our hemisphere. And if you read the various reports from the Southern Command to the Senate Armed Forces Committee, which produces, regularly every 6 months, every year, reports that I read, in those they say that we have to ensure that these malign governments, such as Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, they are the ones who are bringing in these countries, in what they call beneficial investment, which is actually a threat against us. So what we need to do to ensure that these countries, which are our enemies, do not come into our area. We have to overthrow the governments who are bringing them in to invest in their economies, which is a very twisted argument. So that's the third category. I think those three are saying to Trump, what do you think you're doing? You're causing a huge headache for us very soon in the future if you go in.
Reading from what you're saying, is that there is growing concern already about Trump sort of overthrowing international law and the international order, Gaza, Ukraine, elsewhere in the Middle East, Iran, all the rest of it. But that is also, in the case of Venezuela, and all the sort of unanticipated consequences that his actions are having, that's creating more pressure within the United States, to at least amongst sort of opinion formers and politicians and so on, creating more pressure in the United States to sort of get a grip and pull back towards the established rules of law and all the stuff that you've been talking about. That's really interesting. Just a quick response, because it's not necessary for to develop the discussion, but I'm just interested. What's your opinion, just from actually, and his advisors, of course, does Trump actually understand that he's having this impact, or is it what you might call collateral damage as he sort of pursues his plan? What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, he doesn't understand anything really, quite frankly. I mean, he's a businessman, but apart from that, he understands extremely little. He's very ignorant. If you ask him any question about literature or anything like that, he doesn't know what you're talking about. I don't have time to go on that, but one can write an encyclopedia about his ignorance, which is, monumental. But he is the mechanism which legitimizes, because he's charismatic and he's got this base and so on, two other forces which are much more sinister, who I think are behind it. What the United States, what Trump expresses is the desire by this section of U.S. imperialism, to call it as the real name, to stop what we call multipolarity. The United States oligarchy or ruling elite are extremely concerned about the rise of this multipolar world, which emerged inevitably because of the very weaponization of the United States with everything they have available to them: the dollar, sanctions, war, and so on. So the United States is using war, and aggression and threats in order to try to stop or slow down multipolarity as much as possible. And I think it was Trump himself said this. It was a guy who is in his cabinet called Peter Navarro, who persuaded him about the tariff. The basic idea, which is extremely simplistic. I'm an economist, so I think I hope I know what I'm talking about. His basic idea was, if you apply, tariffs to import from countries where there are U.S. companies operating, such as China, Vietnam, Mexico, and many other places, if you apply tariff, you make very difficult for those companies to import German stuff to the U.S. economy. So therefore, and the therefore is where there is a non sequitur. It doesn't follow, but he thought, therefore, these companies will realize that their products are going to be more expensive because of the tariffs when they come into the U.S. market. As a consequence, they draw the conclusion which they will come and abandon the country where they are, and then invest in the United States, and therefore the United States will reindustrialize. And he calculated in several speeches he made. I follow U.S. politics literally every day. In various speeches he made, he thought this reindustrialization process was going to take something like 3 months, which is to sort of abandon a plan where you're built for 20 years and coming back in the United States with everything will take easily 5 to 10 years, even no longer. It's totally bonkers. So at the moment, what all he's doing is actually increasing the prices of everything. And the United States not only is suffering from inflation, but also is contracting. In the last quarter, the economy of the United States contracted by 0.3%, which in terms of their GDP is monumental. And, everything is getting very bad. So that is his cabinet. That is the driving force. The idea you have to stop multipolarity, because otherwise, in terms of, just one small footnote, in terms of the competitive battle, in terms of, technology, efficiency, and so on, the United States already lost the battle. It's not that they are competing not to lose. They already lost. So therefore, they believe that they can maintain their world supremacy by military means. This explains, and this is where Venezuela Nigeria, and anybody else fits in.
Yeah, I very much agree with that latter. I'm not sure I'm enough of an economist to comment on the impact of his tariff and sanction behaviour, but it's very clear if you look at Europe and Ukraine, if you look at what's happening in the Middle East, and I'm not just referring to Gaza, I'm thinking of Israel, what's happening in Syria, the fact that Hezbollah have been destroyed in Lebanon. It's an attempt to break up the order in order to reassert the United States dominance in a situation where economically the United States is in slow decline. It's not going to collapse in the next few years, that's obvious, but it's in a period of slow decline, and China is in a period of increasing importance, both economically and politically. And that's how I understand some of the things you're saying. And it's very interesting to sort of consider it from a sort of economic policy point of view. We're rapidly running out of time. I wish we weren't. I could go on for another half an hour or more. But let me ask you as a final question, from the sublime to the ridiculous, as it were. Let me ask you about British policy. The UK, as I understand it, has supported what Trump is doing, not just currently, but over the period of time that you and I have been discussing in previous parts of this podcast. The UK has supported it. It has imposed sanctions or some sanctions. Do you think these will have any impact, or are they simply sort of moral support for the position of the United States? And the other thing that I wonder is Keir Starmer, given his approach on the militarization of Europe and his sort of strong support for what Trump is doing in the Middle East, is Keir Starmer likely to offer any form of military support to the US if it engages further with Venezuela? I don't mean boots on the ground, of course. Other sorts of material aid, specialist services, and that sort of thing in Ukraine. What do you reckon?
On the first part of the question, I mean, ever since the Chavez government came to office, the government has been hostile. I think the reason is a junior partner of the United States. I have the strong impression, I think I can base on factual information. The United Kingdom is an appendage, militarily and politically, of the United States. There is no adventure that I'm aware of the United States involved itself in the world without the support of Britain in the last period. Literally all of it. And the Europeans occasionally have problems, misgivings, sometimes support. Normally now they completely capitulated. And Venezuela fits it into that thing. The illegal retention of, $2.1 billion in 31 tons of gold. Now this has gone up massively because the price of gold has increased enormously. And they have applied sanctions as well. There are two things where they can contribute, the UK. Number one, they can contribute by legitimizing the sanctions, by applying sanctions themselves. So the media will sort of immediately, have a field day to say, even Britain, which is very reasonable and sober, so on, are applying sanctions as well. That's number one. But number two, in terms of intelligence, but also in terms of diplomacy, one of the most skillful people in the world regarding foreign policy are the British. So that's the second thing. Yes, compared to the Americans, you read the report from U.S. ambassadors and you read the reports of British ambassadors, my God, I sometimes feel very proud to be here, but not for the right reasons. They're quite sophisticated. They really know. They speak the language, they know the history and so on. So, and the third thing is the United Kingdom has several military bases around the place. And one of the things where it can play and has been playing a significant role is in Guyana. Guyana is on the side of Venezuela. The United States has militarized it. And the territorial dispute between those two, between Venezuela and Guyana, has been deliberately militarized by the United States with joint maneuvers literally all the time, deployment of helicopters, and so on. And that's where the UK can play an important role because of the Commonwealth connection. And Guyana will use anything, the Guyanese government, which is, at the moment a prisoner of the United States. And on everything else, certainly in terms of Europe, regarding the participation of the UK in the massive increase of military expenditure in terms of GDP from 2 or 3% to 5.1%. Is absolutely incredible. What it means is this: the UK and the Europeans will take money from the taxpayer, impoverishing them, applying austerity in order to finance these things, this increase and they will buy the weapons from the United States. And then if there is any war that has to be carried out because they purchase the weapons, they will be the ones who actually go into the field to wage the battle. Coming back to the question of Venezuela to finally answer the question on this particular aspect, I doubt very much, unless things get very out of hand, that the British are going to send troops. But their support can be extremely useful. And, Starmer is playing that role. I suppose the previous prime minister played the same role, and the previous one to that one also the same. So we haven't got too many illusions about them, I'm afraid.
Sure. But where they can provide serious support if the situation develops is, for example, the use of Menwith Hill as a spy station for the United States, picking up intelligence information and so forth. So, we've had a really wide-ranging discussion, and I have to end it, unfortunately. I could go on here fascinated by what you're saying, and I hope our listeners are as well. I could go on for ages. But I just wanted to move down a gear, as it were, and before we close, ask you to say, very briefly, a moment or two, what what does Venezuela Solidarity Campaign and the other organizations across the world that are opposing this action, what would you want for people in Britain to do in terms of supporting what you're saying about the likelihood of war and opposing it and putting pressure on our government and so on?
Yeah, the first thing is to defend the national sovereignty of a sovereign country because it's got the right to its own self-determination, and nobody should actually mess up with that, especially with military aggression. So we want them to sort of take that up. That's number one. Number two, get into our website and get the information that we produce regarding all of this crisis which is going on right now. And if you can, please join the campaign. But even better, or even better, as they say in London, what you can do is actually use our material. And if you belong to any organization, a union branch, any organization, any association that you may belong to, sort of go and encourage them to adopt a resolution using our material, condemning two things. Number one, the aggression of the United States, opposing it, rejecting it, condemning it. But number two, asking the British government not to participate and being complicit in it. And certainly, ideally, also indicate to them, could you actually say that this is not a good idea as a British government because you carry some weight? That would be wonderful. And, that would really help us. It help Venezuela. It will help the sovereignty of Venezuela. It will help the sovereignty of Latin America as a whole, which is under threat by this bully called Donald Trump.
Right. You're on, Francisco. When we post this video live, it will have some information at the end that directs people to the Venezuelan solidarity campaign and all the stuff you're talking about. Well, I just want to close by reminding people of something I said right at the beginning when I was introducing Francisco, and that it was he was very well placed to tell us what was going on in Venezuela. I think the whole of this podcast, the deep dive into oil and economics, the sweep across Latin America and its responses to what's going on, and even the most recent things we've talked about, Britain and the United States and so on, all of those show how useful it is to have people like yourself working every single day on this issue and keeping the rest of us informed. So thank you very, very much indeed on behalf of Labour CND and every single Venezuela supporter in this country. And I hope we have you back again in the near future, but not to talk about a war that's progressing. Francisco Dominguez, thank you very much indeed.
Been a great pleasure. Thank you very much to Labour CND, and anytime, any day, any month, I'll be delighted to come back. Thank you so much.